Titanic, the final hours of the ship that shocked the world. On the morning of April 10, 1912, thousands gathered at Southampton to witness the beginning of a remarkable maiden voyage. The ship was RMS Titanic. At roughly 269 meters long, Titanic represented far more than transportation. It was a symbol of engineering, wealth, and an era filled with confidence in technological progress. For first-class passengers, there were luxurious lounges, elegant dining rooms, a gymnasium, and even Turkish baths. But below those decks was an entirely different world. Hundreds of third-class passengers were crossing the Atlantic in search of a new life in America. Millionaires, workers, families, and immigrants. All were traveling toward the same destination. None of them knew that Titanic's first voyage would also be its last. The first days of the voyage passed peacefully. Titanic continued across the Atlantic toward New York. But by April 14th, ships in the region were reporting dangerous ice ahead. Icebergs and large fields of ice had been spotted across the North Atlantic. Throughout the day, several warnings reached Titanic's wireless room. Some were delivered to the bridge. But wireless communication in 1912 wasn't used exclusively for navigation and safety. Operators were also busy transmitting personal messages for passengers. Titanic continued onward. As night fell, the conditions became increasingly dangerous. The sea was exceptionally calm, and the night was dark. With no moonlight and almost no waves breaking against the base of an iceberg, spotting ice at a distance became extremely difficult. And Titanic continued moving through the darkness. It was around 11:40 p.m. Lookout Frederick Fleet noticed a dark shape directly ahead. It was an iceberg. He immediately rang the warning bell and telephoned the bridge. The crew now had only seconds to react. An attempt was made to turn the enormous ship away. But Titanic was massive, and the iceberg was already dangerously close. The bow avoided a direct collision, but the starboard side passed alongside the ice. At first, the impact may have seemed surprisingly minor to some passengers. Many felt little more than a strange vibration. Below the waterline, however, the situation was completely different. Seawater was entering Titanic's compartments. The ship had been designed to remain afloat with a limited number of compartments flooded. But the damage affected too many of them. When Titanic's designer Thomas Andrews assessed the situation, the reality became terrifyingly clear. The ship could not be saved. Now, another problem became painfully clear. There weren't enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. More than 2,200 people were on Titanic, while its lifeboats had space for only about 1,178. Even more remarkably, Titanic actually met and exceeded the lifeboat regulations of its time. The regulations simply had not kept pace with the enormous new generation of passenger ships. As evacuation began, another problem emerged. Many passengers simply couldn't believe Titanic was going to sink. Leaving a warm, brightly lit ocean liner for a tiny lifeboat in the freezing darkness seemed more dangerous to some than remaining aboard. As a result, several early lifeboats were lowered without being filled to capacity. Every empty seat represented an opportunity that would never return. Meanwhile, wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride began transmitting desperate calls for help. CQD signals and the relatively new SOS distress call were sent into the Atlantic night. One of the ships that received Titanic's distress call was RMS Carpathia. When Captain Arthur Rostron learned what was happening, he immediately changed course and headed toward Titanic. He pushed his ship forward as quickly as possible, despite a terrifying obstacle: the same dangerous ice. Carpathia was coming, but Titanic was running out of time. As the night continued, Titanic's bow sank deeper into the water. Those still aboard now understood how serious the situation had become. Most of the lifeboats were gone. Survivor accounts describe the ship's musicians continuing to play during the evacuation. But maintaining calm was becoming impossible. Titanic's angle grew steeper. Its lights continued burning for a while longer. Then the situation became uncontrollable. In the early hours of April 15, 1912, Titanic broke into two major sections and disappeared beneath the dark waters of the North Atlantic. Less than 3 hours had passed since the iceberg was first spotted. What remained were lifeboats filled with survivors, and many others fighting for their lives in the freezing ocean. By the time Carpathia reached the area, Titanic was gone. Captain Rostron and his crew began collecting survivors from the lifeboats. As morning arrived, the true scale of the catastrophe became clear. Of the more than 2,200 people aboard Titanic, only around 700 survived. More than 1,500 were lost. People who only a day earlier had been traveling aboard one of the world's most magnificent ships were now wrapped in blankets on Carpathia, desperately searching for family members and friends. Titanic would never reach New York. Instead, Carpathia would arrive carrying those who had survived her final night. Titanic's wreck would not be discovered until 1985, resting roughly 3,800 meters beneath the North Atlantic. But perhaps the reason Titanic continues to fascinate us isn't really the ship itself. Almost every level of society was represented aboard. Some of the wealthiest people in the world. Immigrant families hoping to begin new lives in America. Crew members, children, and ordinary people who had no idea their lives were about to change within a matter of hours. Titanic's story brought technology, social class, courage, human error, and chance together on a single night. Perhaps that's why, more than a century later, we are still talking about it. Because Titanic isn't simply the story of a ship that sank. It's the story of how something people believed was nearly invincible disappeared in a matter of hours. And above all, it's the story of the people who disappeared with it into the dark waters of the North Atlantic.